The smell of lemon and ammonia was the only thing that felt real. It was the smell of a job done right, of surfaces so clean they squeaked under a microfiber cloth. Zara pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, the rubber wheels whispering against the polished black marble. It was 1 a.m. The entire 40th floor of the Quan Tower was silent, a hollow cathedral of glass and steel overlooking a city that never slept. This was her world, a world of empty boardrooms and darkened executive suites, where she was a ghost in a light blue uniform and a crisp white apron, erasing the traces of the powerful men who moved through these halls by day. Her thoughts were on Lily, her 7-year-old daughter, asleep at her grandmother's apartment. She imagined her small body curled under the unicorn-themed comforter, her breathing soft and even. That image was the engine that drove Zara through these long, lonely nights. This job, with its premium pay for the graveyard shift, was their lifeline. It paid for the tiny apartment that was all theirs, for Lily's art classes, for the promise of a life better than the one Zara had known. She reached the final door. The one with no nameplate, just a discreet silver thumbprint scanner. Mr. Kwan's office. The big boss. She'd never seen him, not in the 6 months she'd worked here. According to the other cleaners, he was a phantom who came and went at impossible hours. His office was always immaculate when she arrived, as if he commanded the dust itself to settle elsewhere. Tonight, however, a sliver of cool white light bled from under the door. Her heart gave a single, hard thump against her ribs. Company policy was clear. If a room is occupied, you move on. You do not knock. You do not disturb. You become even more of a ghost. She started to turn her cart, ready to finish up in the break room and clock out. But a sound stopped her. A low, sharp crack, like ice breaking under pressure. It was followed by a heavy thud. Zara froze. Her hand tightened on the handle of her cart. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to pretend she heard nothing, to get on the elevator and go home to her daughter. But her feet were rooted to the floor. She was competent under pressure, a trait honed by years of navigating a world that wasn't designed for her. She acted before she thought, a habit that had saved her more than once. She pushed her cart silently to the side, took a deep breath, and pressed her ear against the cold, lacquered wood of the door. Silence. Then a ragged breath. Another. It was the sound of someone in pain. She told herself it was none of her business. She told herself that men in offices like this did not need the help of the night shift cleaner. But the sound was so profoundly human, so starkly at odds with the sterile perfection of the building. Before she could talk herself out of it, her hand was on the door. It was unlocked. She pushed it open a fraction of an inch. The office was a testament to minimalist wealth. A massive desk of volcanic rock, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the glittering tapestry of Los Angeles, and one leather chair. A man was standing by the window, his back to her. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed molded to his frame. His hand was pressed against the glass, and his shoulders were rigid with tension. On the floor lay a shattered whiskey glass, the amber liquid and ice splayed across the dark wood like a weeping wound. That was the sound she'd heard. He hadn't noticed her. She should have backed away, closed the door, and vanished. But she saw the tremor in the hand pressed against the window. She saw the slight, almost imperceptible slump in his posture, a crack in a facade of absolute control. Quietly, she pushed her cart into the room. She retrieved a dustpan and a small brush from its side. He still hadn't moved. The only sound was the faint whisper of the brush against the floor as she methodically swept up the shards of glass. Each piece was a tiny, glittering star. She worked with the focused efficiency she applied to every task, her movements economical and sure. When the last piece of glass was in the pan, she rose. He had turned. And she finally saw him. Kwon Ji-han. His face was carved from unforgiving stone, all sharp angles and severe lines. His black hair was cut with military precision. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, so dark they seemed to absorb the light in the room, and they were filled with a cold, desolate fury. He wasn't looking at the mess on the floor. He was looking at her. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, a rumble of gravel and ice. It was not a question. It was an accusation. "I was cleaning up the glass, sir," Zara said, her own voice steady, betraying none of the frantic pounding in her chest. She met his gaze, a mistake she recognized the instant she made it. "You weren't supposed to look men like this in the eye. You were supposed to be part of the furniture." He took a step toward her. He moved like the room owed him space. "I did not ask you to. Your job is to clean empty rooms. This room is not empty." I heard the glass break. I thought someone might be hurt. A muscle feathered in his jaw. "You thought," he said the word, as if it were an obscenity. He stopped less than a foot from her. He was taller than she'd realized. The air around him was cold, scented with something clean and sharp, like cedar and winter air. "Your job is not to think. It is to clean. You are paid to be invisible. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes, sir," she said, her chin held high. She would not let him see her fear. "Then you understand that you saw nothing. You heard nothing. You were never in this room." His eyes flickered down to the dustpan in her hand, then back to her face. For a moment, the fury in them was eclipsed by something else. Something that looked like exhaustion, bone deep and raw. It was there and gone in a heartbeat. "There's still liquid on the floor," she said, her professionalism a shield. "It will damage the wood if it's not cleaned properly." He stared at her, a long, unnerving silence stretching between them. She could feel him assessing her, dissecting her with that chilling gaze. He was a predator, and she had just wandered into his hunting ground. "Leave it," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It was more menacing than a shout. "Get out." Zara didn't need to be told twice. She backed out of the room, pulling her cart with her. She closed the door softly, the click of the latch echoing in the silent hallway. Her hands were shaking. She leaned against the wall, taking a deep, shuddering breath. She had seen a crack in the armor of the most powerful man in the building, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he would never forgive her for it. The next night, she expected a pink slip waiting for her. She expected to be escorted from the building, her livelihood snatched away because she had dared to show a moment of human concern. But nothing happened. Her time card was where it always was. Her supervisor said nothing. The 40th floor was silent and empty when she arrived, Mr. Kwan's office pristine, the wood floor showing no sign of the spilled whiskey. It was as if the encounter had never happened. A week passed. Then, too. The memory began to fade, softened by the daily demands of motherhood and work. She convinced herself she had imagined the desolation in his eyes, the tremor in his hand. He was just a powerful man having a bad night. It was a Wednesday just after midnight when it happened. She was on the 38th floor this time, wiping down the vast, empty conference table when the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the hallway in a pulsing, eerie red glow. An alarm began to blare, a shrill, insistent scream. Before she could process what was happening, the elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged open. Two of Mr. Kwan's security guards, men she recognized from their silent posts in the lobby, stepped out. They were not in their usual crisp uniforms. They were dressed in black, and they moved with a tense, urgent purpose. They saw her and immediately raised their weapons. Zara dropped her spray bottle, her hands flying into the air. "I'm just the cleaner," she said, her voice a strangled whisper. One of the men spoke into his wrist. "Civilian on 38. Female." A familiar voice crackled back, distorted but unmistakable. Kwon Jihan's voice. "Bring her." The world tilted. The guards flanked her, their hands firm on her arms, and guided her not towards the emergency stairs, but back towards the elevator. The doors opened, and there he was. Kwon Jihan stood in the center of the elevator car. He was wearing another perfect suit, this one a dark charcoal gray, but his tie was loosened, and there was a single, stark drop of blood on the collar of his white shirt. His eyes found hers, and they were not cold this time. They were blazing. "Get in," he commanded. The guards pushed her inside, and the doors slid shut. The elevator didn't go down. It went up. What's happening? Zara asked, her voice trembling. Jihan didn't look at her. His focus was on the small security screen in the corner of the car, which showed a chaotic scene in the lobby. Men in black tactical gear. The flash of gunfire. A business dispute, he said, his tone clipped and devoid of emotion. The elevator stopped at the 40th floor. The doors opened to a scene of controlled chaos. Several more men, all dressed like the guards, were positioned by the windows, weapons at the ready. Jihan strode out, and Zara was pulled along with him, a piece of debris caught in his wake. He led her directly into his office and pushed her behind his massive desk. "Stay down," he ordered. "And stay quiet." The sounds of the firefight from the lobby below were muffled but audible. The pop-pop-pop of gunfire. The distant crash of shattering glass. Zara huddled on the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. All she could think about was Lily. She had to get back to Lily. Jihan stood by the window, a phone pressed to his ear, issuing a string of quiet, lethal commands in Korean. He moved through the violence like it was a language he was born speaking. He was calm, his posture relaxed, his control absolute. His competence was a terrifying thing to witness. The firefight seemed to last an eternity. When it finally subsided, a heavy silence fell over the building, broken only by the lingering wail of the alarm. One of Jihan's men appeared at the office door and spoke in a low voice. Jihan nodded, then turned his attention back to Zara. He walked over and crouched down in front of her. The adrenaline had faded from his eyes, replaced by that familiar, chilling emptiness. "You are a complication," he said softly. "I didn't see anything," she said quickly, the words tumbling out. "I won't say anything. I just want to go home. My daughter." "Stop talking," he held up a hand. She noticed a long, shallow cut along his forearm, blood welling up and staining the sleeve of his expensive shirt. It was bleeding freely. Without thinking, she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, clean cloth she used for polishing fixtures. She held it out. "You're bleeding." He stared at the cloth, then at her face. For a second, he looked genuinely confused, as if the concept of a stranger offering him aid was completely alien. He didn't take it. Instead, his gaze fell on a small, silver-framed photograph on the corner of his desk, one that had been knocked over in the chaos. Zara's eyes followed his. It was a picture of a young woman with his same dark, intense eyes and a brilliant, unrestrained smile. She looked happy, carefree. "Me son," he whispered, the name a ghost on his lips. He reached out and set the frame upright. "My sister." The words hung in the air between them. He didn't elaborate, but he didn't have to. The story was there in the raw grief that flashed across his face, a wound he kept hidden beneath layers of ice and steel. A woman he had failed to protect. One of his men cleared his throat from the doorway. "Sir, the police are on their way. We need to be gone." Jihan stood up, the mask of command slamming back into place. He looked down at Zara. "You will be taken home. A car is waiting in the garage. You will tell the police you were stuck in a stairwell during the alarm and saw nothing. You will forget my name. You will forget this office. You will not return to this building. Your final pay will be delivered to you. Do you understand?" It was a way out. An escape. She should have been flooded with relief. But as she looked at the blood dripping from his arm, at the carefully blank expression on his face, she found herself doing the last thing she should have. She stood up, picked up the cloth she had dropped, and stepped toward him. "You need to put pressure on that," she said, her voice firm. She took his arm, her touch surprisingly gentle, and pressed the cloth against the cut. His entire body went rigid, a statue of coiled muscle. But he didn't pull away. She held the pressure, her gaze fixed on her task. She could feel the heat of his skin, the thrum of his pulse beneath her fingers. It was the most intimate contact she'd ever had with a man she wasn't related to. A charged silence filled the office. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "It's what a person does," she said simply, not looking up. "When someone is hurt, you help." He watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. His men shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. "It is time to go," he said finally, his voice flat. He gently pulled his arm from her grasp. He didn't thank her. He just turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the center of his silent, damaged office. A guard escorted her down a service elevator to the parking garage. The ride home was a blur. She stumbled into her grandmother's apartment, scooped a sleeping Lily from her bed, and held her daughter so tightly the little girl stirred in her sleep. She was safe. They were safe. She had lost her job, but they were safe. The next day, a black town car delivered a thick envelope to her apartment. Inside was a cashier's check for a sum of money so large it made her dizzy. It was enough to live on for years. Severance pay. Hush money. A clean break. But life was not that simple. She was no longer just a cleaner. She was a witness. A loose end. And Kwon Ji-han was not the kind of man who left loose ends. 2 weeks later, as she was walking Lily home from the park, she saw it. A black sedan parked across the street from her apartment building. It was the same model that had brought her home from the tower. It sat there all day. It was there the next day, too. She wasn't free. She was being watched. The fear was a constant, cold knot in her stomach. She felt like a mouse being observed by a hawk, waiting for the inevitable dive. Every knock on the door sent a jolt of panic through her. She started looking over her shoulder everywhere she went. One afternoon, she decided she couldn't live like this. She had to confront it. She bundled Lily up and walked directly to the black car. The window slid down before she even reached it. A man in a dark suit, the same guard from the elevator, looked at her without expression. "Is there a problem, miss?" he asked. "Why are you watching me?" Zara demanded, her voice shaking only slightly. "He said I was done. He paid me. Tell him to leave me alone." The man's face remained impassive. "Mr. Kwon is concerned for your safety." "I was safe before I met him," she shot back. "This isn't for my safety. This is for his control. Tell him I'm not a threat." The man simply inclined his head. "I will pass on your message." The window slid back up. That night, the car was gone. For the first time in weeks, Zara felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he had listened. Maybe it was finally over. She put Lily to bed, reading her 3 stories instead of the usual 2, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a month. Around midnight, a knock came at her door. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was soft, hesitant. Zara's blood ran cold. She crept to the door, her breath held tight in her chest, and looked through the peephole. It was him. Kwon Ji-han stood in the dingy, poorly lit hallway of her apartment building, looking utterly out of place. He was not wearing one of his immaculate suits. He was in a simple black sweater and dark trousers. His hair was disheveled, and his face was wrecked. The icy control was gone, shattered. His eyes were shadowed with a grief so profound it seemed to hollow him out from the inside. She opened the door.
He didn't speak.
He just stood there, looking at her. The scent of rain and whiskey clung to him. She saw then that his hands were trembling, the same way they had in his office that first night. "What do you want?" she whispered, her hand gripping the edge of the door. "It's her birthday today," he said, his voice broken, raw. "Me sons." Zara stared at him, this powerful, dangerous man who had torn her life apart, now standing on her doorstep like a lost soul. The Korean mafia boss. The predator. And he was falling apart right in front of her. "You need to leave," she said, but the words had no force behind them. He took a stumbling step forward, and for a horrifying second, she thought he might collapse. He braced his hand against the doorframe, his head bowed. "I went to her grave," he continued, his voice thick. I told her I was sorry. But the dead don't forgive you." He finally looked up, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "They told me what you said. I was safe before I met him, you're right. Everyone I get close to, everyone who shows me any kindness, they end up paying the price for it." He let out a harsh, shuddering breath. "My sister smiled at one of my enemies. A simple, polite smile at a party. A week later, they ran her car off the road. For smiling." The confession hung in the cramped hallway, heavy and suffocating. This was his wound, the one he carried every second of every day. The guilt that fueled his coldness, that powered his empire of violence. Stay out of my life, he had warned her. But here he was, dragging his broken life to her door. All her fear, all her anger, seemed to evaporate, replaced by a wave of something she couldn't name. It was pity, but it was more than that. It was a flicker of understanding. She did something she never would have imagined possible. She stepped aside. "Come in, Jihan," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. He looked at her, his expression one of utter shock, as if she'd offered a drowning man a lifeline. He hesitated for a moment, then walked numbly into her small, tidy apartment. It was a world away from his sterile tower. The walls were covered in Lily's colorful drawings. A pile of children's books sat on the coffee table. It smelled of cinnamon and clean laundry. It smelled like a home. He stood in the middle of her living room, looking lost and out of scale. He looked at a crayon drawing of a smiling sun taped to the wall. "My daughters," Zara said quietly, closing the door behind him. He just nodded, his throat working. He sank onto her sofa, burying his face in his hands. The sound that escaped him was not a sob. It was a sound of pure, undiluted agony, torn from the deepest part of his soul. It was the sound of a man who had been holding himself together by a thread for years, and that thread had finally snapped. Zara stood there, watching the most dangerous man she had ever met cry in her living room. She didn't comfort him. She didn't touch him. She simply went into her small kitchen and put the kettle on to boil, the familiar ritual a small anchor in the sudden, violent storm that had just broken inside her home. She was crossing a line she could never uncross, and she knew it. She was letting the monster in. And the most terrifying part was, she wasn't sure she wanted him to leave.